Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Have you serviced your farm's most important asset? Soil is your most powerful machine. See more at smartnutritionmst.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today, we have an awesome guest with us. We have Dick Wittman from Whitman Consulting. Dick is a longtime farmer, and he is recently retired. He is now board chair and transition coach. He has a phenomenal track record, amazing experience, and we're happy to have Dick on the show to share a little bit about a guidebook that he created titled Building Effective Farm Management Systems. And this rolls in as part of our fall book series. So welcome, Dick.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm so happy to have you on the show. As everybody in our audience knows, I tend to love farm business management, and I was tickled pink when I found your guidebook because I think this is a resource that you out there will not want to miss. So before we dive in and speak about the guidebook, Dick, why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about who you are, your background, and then that'll build into why you built this guidebook. Take it away.
Well, I started out in the banking industry, working in large and complex loans and eventually into consulting with large banks, focusing a lot on management process and board development. And then I had the opportunity to go back to our family business in 1980 and at the same time set up a private consulting business working with family businesses. And over the years, that consulting practice has evolved in a kind of a combination of, on the hard side, the financial management, process improvement, and on the soft side, family business transition and governance. So those two sides of the equation both need to be at a level of excellence for farms to survive into the long term. And I started doing a lot of workshops and client work in the early 80s, and the more I did, the more people said you needed to put what you're doing into a book. And I resisted at first because I didn't really want to write a book. But one of my core principles is I want to see people implement concepts. I just don't want to go out there and stir up a good idea and go have people go home and say, well, that was interesting, and not change behavior. So I realized that in order for the people that I was trying to reach to actually implement, I needed to put this resource in writing. So it's really not a book as much as it is a management software where it takes principles of farm management, talks about the concepts, shows actual examples of how farms have taken these examples into practice. And then it has a number of computerized templates where people can jumpstart the process. They can take sample policies or sample job descriptions or a sample mission statement and say, okay, now I know what it could look like. Now, how do I sit down as a team and create the same thing for our own team of people? A lot of what the book does is it takes the mystique out of the process. And yet it's not a turnkey. You don't take it and copy it and say, this is mine, because then it wouldn't do you any good. But it guides you through the process as a team to build a documented governance system for your business.
I love it. You know, like I said, when I found out about this guidebook, I was just tickled pink because I come from the entrepreneurial world and the farming world. I'm a farmer as well, and I'm a business owner. And in the entrepreneurial space, there is mountains and mountains of resources to help people on the street start businesses, grow their business and how to operate it. And then, you know, when I looked around in the libraries online for books specifically geared to farming and agriculture, there wasn't that much. So it frustrated me a little bit because for my business and in that space, there's a lot of books similar to what you do, kind of that business plan, that framework, those systems. But again, why not for farmers? These are some sophisticated, big businesses, and we are feeding the world. We need those resources in agriculture too. So I was really excited to see your guidebook.
Well, you wonder, you made the point that there's just very few of these resources around. And before I published the guidebook, I did a massive search throughout the US and Canada and United Kingdom to see what was already out there in the farm management realm. And there were just virtually nothing out there. There were some nice resources on HR and some specific topical documents like building a business plan, but they were all very narrow focused. And what was missing is how do you look at management as a process? How do you look at setting up all the pieces of a professional governance system in your business? And how do they tie together like an engine driving your business? So all these things that we work with on clients to help build and resolve, like building a mission statement, having an organization chart drawn out, having written job descriptions, having a complete consensus on your team of what your operating policies and SOPs are, and what are the metrics that you're going to use to measure performance. These are just basic management principles that any good business needs to be at a level of excellence if they want to succeed. And I think there's two reasons why these resources have not been more prevalent. One is farmers get into farming because they like to grow stuff, not because they like to write job descriptions and do financial trend sheets. Those are things that the good ones realize they have to do, not like to do. And the second problem is that our educational system has really deteriorated in its potential to deliver good education on these topics. Many people in ag schools are shifted over to the business side to take some basic business classes, but very few of those classes are tailored to agricultural implementation, particularly in financial statement preparation. Very few of the business classes that are out there address the complex dynamics of farming and business and family that are all wrapped up together. And family businesses control a majority of farmland in the world. So unless you can address the dynamics of a business, a family, and farming all together, you don't have something that can work as a good, solid management process.
Excellent. So I have this eerie ability to detect what our audience is thinking. And I have a feeling they're going to be going, I don't need that, Tracy. We're just a small farm, or you know what, we're fine the way we are. So before I even ask you about what is in the guidebook, I want to go and talk about who is this for? Is this for small farms, large farms, type of farm? I'm sure it doesn't matter, but I'm thinking to many of the farm operations that are on the smaller side, they go, well, why do I need this? Do they need it?
That's a great question. And I'll get this question frequently in a workshop where I've gone through all this whole array of issues that need to be dealt with. And I'll have a young couple come up to me and they've got a baby in their arms and they're going, well, that sounds fine for you as a big, large corporate farmer, but why do I need all this stuff? And I just look at them and say, well, you may not need the complexity that I need for my business today, but where are you going to be in 5 years or 20 years down the road? That little baby you're holding, what if in 10 years your business has grown tenfold and you got 5 employees and your son or daughter here is looking at whether or not they want to be an owner in your business and whether or not they want to work here? And how are you going to compensate them? How are you going to set up structures for what their roles are? Well, they're just progressively going from white to green, like, oh my gosh, I never thought about this. So this is not a today issue. This is an evolutionary process where you only want your management process to be as complicated as that needs to be at your stage of life. What I find is most of the clients that I work with, they're already into this large growth, significantly complicated business where they have none of this governance structure. They think they communicate, but there is no good communication on many of the issues we just talked about. So they have pretty much massive dysfunctionality. Mm. And had they started when they were that young couple with that baby to build the most simplistic versions of a management process, and then as they got more complicated, they would grow the process with it, it wouldn't be where they are today. Mm. So I think you can say this, if as long as you have 2 or more people involved in a business, there should be alignment in what thinking is on the things we just talked about.
Excellent. I'm glad we touched on that, because even myself, I would have those objections too. And I want to touch on that because, as I was saying, in the entrepreneurial world, they have tons of resources. And if you listen to podcasts, they tell you to do these types of things. Build a framework for your business. And as I was building Farm Marketer, even at 5 team members, you go, who cares? 5 team members, that isn't very big. But you cannot believe the amount of miscommunication. I think I'm a decent communicator, but how everybody gets their own ideas, how if there's nothing in writing, people think they could do it this way. It's unbelievable. Even with a few people, like you said, 2 different operating partners. If it's not in writing, everybody's assuming and forgetting. So I had to develop a framework like this for Farm Marketer as we were growing. And you know what? It really saved me in a lot of areas. Kind of like that operating guide, right? And then once you get that work done, then you kind of just set it and go and update as you need to, right? But exactly. I want to, yeah.
You've seen this. People that are actually consider themselves really high-performing, above-average farm managers who think they have a high level of communication. I've had them in workshops where by the time they got done, they were very pale-faced and basically said, we don't communicate as well as I thought we did. There are many areas where our members of our family, members of our business, employee group, we don't have things in writing that we should have so that we can have clarity in a lot of the things we just talked about. And that assume word that you mentioned is really, it can be very detrimental to a professionally functioning team.
Yeah, it's tough. Okay, so the salesperson in me is getting the objections out of the way, because I sometimes find if we don't address what the audience is potentially thinking, the guard's up and they're not going to take in the good stuff. So my first question to you would have been the size of farm. Now, second one I wanted to touch on, why? The reason I ask is exactly like you said before. Farmers love to farm. If they love being behind a desk, they probably would have went and got a career in the workforce with a lot less stress and liability. So we know farmers like being out in the field, not doing this kind of paperwork. And then they might go, well, we're too small for this. So why? Sell me on why they need this. I mean, sometimes if we speak to those pain points, like increased profitability, whatever it is, why do they need to do this?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is to say, what are the consequences of not doing the things that we advocate doing here? For example, what are the consequences of not having a written mission statement, having your core values put on paper, having a clearly defined organization chart? What if we don't have job descriptions? We just have management by committee, where if everybody's responsible for everything, nobody's responsible for anything. What if we don't have our policies discussed, have consensus, and have them written down? I can take each of those categories and tell you horror stories of what's happened. What if we have no written policy on compensation, and compensation does not match anything in the market? There's no differentiation for skill sets or tenure, and people are at each throats, and the spouses are angry because it doesn't make sense. It's not fair. They look outside farming, look at the business world, and they go, well, if we were there, we would do it this way. People can spot these inequities in unprofessional business practices. But what we don't do is we don't put a financial and a human cost on that omission. And that human cost is a breakdown in relationships. It creates business paralysis. What if we don't have a professional, strategic, and operational planning process, and we don't take it to a documented budget? People live in a world of uncertainty for a year, wondering, well, is the plan that we've all talked through orally going to lead us towards a profit at the end of the year or not? And if we have to wait till the end of the year to find that out, and we go, oh, that didn't work, as opposed to a good planning process that says, it doesn't look so good, what do we do different? There are very definable consequences for everything we just talked about when it does not exist in your operation. If you don't have written job descriptions and clarity of roles, you have nobody knowing who's going to initiate research, or how do we look at the right process to make the best decision on replacing a combine? Or what about marketing? What if the team is in charge of marketing instead of an individual? Who takes the initiative to get up early and study markets and go to workshops and get good at this and develop a marketing plan? It doesn't happen because everybody assumes somebody else will do it. And I have a saying that management by committee is a recipe for mediocrity. And I think I can prove that over and over again over the last 40 to 50 years, that where there's clearly pinpointed responsibility, it doesn't mean that you own that decision and nobody else has influence or input. It just means it's clear that somebody is in the lead on each topic. And when that is defined, others can breathe a sigh of relief that somebody will step up and take the lead. Hopefully, we've assigned jobs to the person that has the best skill set. Yeah. And that takes me to a point that you made earlier about, farmers just want to farm. They don't want to do job descriptions and do finances. But as you look at your larger farm operations, one of the benefits of growing to a larger business is that you can have people specialize. And there'll be people in there that actually like to do HR and like to do finances, and there's a place for that. And there are people who like to run tractors and chase animals. So I feel like that's one of our primary assets as a diversified business, is people can go to school and pursue their passions, and there's a diversity of jobs that would fit skill sets. You don't just come back here because you're a farmer. You might be interested in mechanics, agronomy, in finance, in HR, in specialization, there's value-added crops. What if you're a marketing major and you want to be able to take what you're doing and build added value to it by doing some specialized marketing plan? Every business has to define the skill set needed to get the job done. And then we have to find the people to do those jobs with the best skills. And then that has got to be translated into a job description and an evaluation process of how you're doing this. And this is just business. But how do we take these principles of business and put them into a workable process in a business where people know what the structure is, they know what happens when, where is the documentation stored, how can I look it up, how often do we need to change it, how often do we need to review it? You're never done, but the fact that you've created it creates a foundation where it's a living document that guides your business. And that is far superior to having everything in your head and you assume that what's in your head is the same as what everyone else assumes is in your head.
And guaranteed it never is, because we're all different individuals that think, hear, and remember so differently, right? One thing that I wanted to touch on, I love the ideas that you're bringing in your guidebook. To me, all this stuff and everything I've listened to in the entrepreneurial world, this is straightforward. When I was hiring people to scale up my business, as they call it, I had to put a job description together. I couldn't just put person wanted to do work, work hard, make things happen. You couldn't just put a job ad like that in the newspaper. I had to sit down and grind through and figure out what I needed. And every time somebody didn't work out or did, you'd refine that. But I think this idea, if it hasn't come to the farming operations out there, it's going to come. Not only that, like you've said, how many farm operations and families where people come and if they're getting paid a wage, they don't get a raise. And there's frustration and resentment and like you said, it's those tiny things that you can't even measure. If you have those procedures, I'm pretending this is your guidebook here. If you have that book of how you operate your business, it also gives you a framework. Okay, we do raises once a year. It's not once a year, we're just going to put this aside. And it's a framework that you can fall back on. And it even helps farm families especially avoid a lot of confrontation. Those conversations are hard enough with employees that aren't related to you. Can you imagine trying to have those conversations with farm members, farm family members, right? So just a few random thoughts of my experience on how this idea can meet the farm and how it can benefit.
Well, I not only can imagine it, I have experienced it for decades. And one of the challenges farmers have is they don't value their time. They don't look at every hour that you're awake on the farm. You're not a $5 or $7 or $10 employee. Most of the compensation summary surveys that I do, by the time you take the cash wages and you add all the non-cash fringe benefits, rarely do you see people less than $30 to $40 an hour. And so let's say that they get the bug and they decided, yeah, I need to do this. But in the absence of a guideline or a template, they'll sit down and they'll fumble around for a week trying to write job descriptions, and they'll have a bunch of words that make no sense.
Yeah.
So by giving them sample job descriptions of a mechanic, sample of a foreman, a crop foreman, or a CFO, and you realize, wow, the agronomy manager has 25 potential areas of responsibility.
Nice.
And they look at that and go, I do all those things. I didn't realize there was so many areas that I have to have skill sets. So it doesn't mean we just take that and copy it, but it helps educate us as to the diversity of things that we take for granted. And particularly when it comes to transition, this is a huge issue. I tell people you can't delegate what you can't define. So what if you're trying to encourage the next generation to consider coming back to the farm? And they're trying to decide, well, am I interested in the mechanics side? Am I interested in the marketing side? Am I interested in being the agronomy person? Or maybe I want to be the livestock person. What would a job look like? What would the duties and responsibilities look like? And based on that, what skill sets and education do I need? You have to work backwards into that question. And if your family already has these clearly documented job descriptions, and mom and dad and older brother that are thinking about retiring someday say, all right, here's my list of 25 duties, and I'm ready to start turning over some of these things. If you are educated, you've got skill sets, you've worked off the farm 3 to 5 years, and you've done your apprenticeship, I'm ready to sit down now and establish a timetable and a process for transitioning these duties. But we have something to work from on paper. It's just not, come on back and I'll teach you how to be the agronomy manager in 5 years. And they have no idea what those duties are. And if they saw what they were, maybe they wouldn't even want to do those things. The clarity part of this is really critical when you start looking at particularly transition. And oftentimes the jobs that people need to have done are not the jobs that people wanting to come back to the farm want to do. So a critical part of transition is having alignment of expectations. If we have needs and we have a desire and those mesh, that's good. But if everybody wants to come back and be the agronomy guy and nobody wants to be the equipment mechanic, nobody wants to do finances, and nobody wants to do HR, it will be a wreck.
Absolutely.
Because we need 5 bosses to be making decisions on the agronomy.
That is gold right there. So you're leading us perfectly into the guidebook. We got our objections out of the way. You've sold me on why I need this. Now I really want to dive into some of the different pieces that are in there. You said job descriptions. And to me, that's worth its weight in gold right there, because goodness gracious, I have written many of them, and I would pay somebody to just do that. So job descriptions, you talked about transition. So tell us a little bit more about what's all in there.
Well, it's better to show with the illustration. So this is not a book, it's a binder. And each Each chapter is a concept. So, for example, let's say that you decide as a business, we want to put down on paper our mission, vision, and core values so that we make sure everybody in the team is aligned on what our culture is here. That chapter deals with what do these things mean? Why are they important? And then, as an appendix to each chapter, there are actually computerized files that are on a flash drive where you can see samples of what other people have done.
Oh, nice.
And then you can take those, you can copy, paste, you can edit, but at least you have a working illustration of what it could look like. So going to your question of job descriptions, Chapter 5 deals with organization and role definition. So it walks through why we build organization charts. How do we look at career paths and move from an employee to a manager to a board chairman? And how do we build specific job descriptions for every possible duty in the operation? So in the appendix, we have computerized Word documents that have sample job descriptions you typically see on a farm. We have a herdsman, a equipment support manager, an agronomy manager, a CFO. There's all kinds of different descriptions already there. What I found is once you get a client bought into why this is important, you can have them sit down with these sample job descriptions and as a team, just write their name by the duty that everyone feels is most suited to oversee that role. And when you get done, you have somebody that's good with word processing just goes in and rearranges the duties so that here's John's and here's Susie's job description, and you can modify or change the title, you can delete items, you can add items. But within a short amount of time, you've actually got a workable product, something that makes sense that fits the people. Okay. And in the absence of this, they'll flounder around for a week at $30 an hour times 5. There's $1,500 worth of wasted time, and all they are frustrated, because they don't have anything that looks like it makes sense. People ask me, how can you charge what you charge for the book? And I say it's less than an hour of consulting fee. Yeah. So when you're buying a conceptual guide along with templates that allow you to jumpstart something in a matter of hours, and you realize that you may need to bring a facilitator in to get through some of this, but a lot of this you can do yourselves. And when you can invest in a resource that helps you do a lot of this yourself for less than cost of an hour of consulting, that's a good return. And I've seen people waste thousands of dollars fumbling around trying to do this stuff and not have anything that's even looks credible.
I'm a firm believer in paying for knowledge, and compiled knowledge is even better. I have paid, just in my business, time is money, and I don't have a lot of time. So when I need to learn a skill, just like actually when I launched this show, I took a course. I spent a pretty penny to learn from one of the best podcasters on how to launch a podcast. I could have sat there and Googled and tried to figure it out. I didn't have time, and time is money to me. So I said, hey, I need to learn this. What will it cost to be taught this? And I took a course. I paid for compiled knowledge. And my goodness, I was up and running. The number of mistakes that were avoided, the headaches, compiled knowledge is key. Amen. Amen.
I would agree with you, and I don't mean to be self-serving. The other dimension of the book is that it comes with a DVD or a USB of a video. It's the kind of flagship presentation I've done for years. And you have seen this in farm workshops. You tend to get the people coming to these workshops that already are thirsty for education.
Yes.
They're oftentimes the more progressive in the business, and they'll go through, if it's an all-day workshop where we do concepts for half a day and then we put them through case study mode, they're hooked. They're ready to go home and do this. But the problem is, they have this horrified look on their face of how am I going to go home and sell this to my family? They don't feel articulate enough to be able to bring the same messages home, even to convince them why they should get the book or read through it. So that was another thing I drug my feet a long time on. People said, you need to record this so people have a recording of your presentation. So I finally did. And And so people have the guidebook, they have a recorded presentation where they can take this back to their business. They can play it all the way through to see how all these pieces connect. Then they can use that chapter by chapter to work through in a self-study way to implement. And I tell people, I've had people come up and said, I'm going to take this home. I'm going to strap grandma and grandpa to the chair. I'm going to tape their eyelids open, turn their hearing aids way up, and make them watch this DVD. And I chuckle, but they are that passionate about it. And they also realize that many times, even though they believe in this, particularly the younger generations, they're not politically positioned to come home and say, we need to do all this stuff. Yeah. And the reason they're afraid is because they're afraid that they're going to present the idea that their parents or their seniors are not successful. And I tell people, they say, well, how am I going to go home and sell this at home? And I try to tell them, well, here's what you don't do. You don't go home and say to your siblings or your partners or your parents, well, I just went to this great workshop and I learned all these great ideas and I can't believe you guys have survived being so screwed up. That's what you don't say. What we need to be able to have them come away with is saying, we're farming in a more complex era than we ever have. And I've just been through an experience where I now realize what has made you successful is you have a lot of this, but a lot of what has made you successful is in your head. And until we can take what's in your head and bring it onto paper, we can't leverage your knowledge, your experience, your wisdom. And so if you would let us be a partner with you in creating this documented management process, and then how would we build this into the future so that we can be as successful as you are? You just changed the entire conversation.
That was bold.
Pushing people away to inviting them in. But I can't tell you how often the knee-jerk reaction is to go home and say, boy, you guys are really screwed up. I just learned all this stuff and you don't do any of these things.
You don't. Especially too, and maybe I've been that person. Passionate, young, insensitive. I'm working on it as I get older. But, and all jokes aside, we're young and we're excited. And sometimes you ever have that experience when you're telling somebody about something you're excited about that they weren't part of it, whether it's a holiday or this or that, glossy look. And then you look at them and you go, how do you not get this? Why aren't you excited? They didn't see it. They weren't part of it. They don't care. And if you don't word it properly, you're right. You're just going to put them into the mode where they're feeling attacked. And that's lovely because there is so much wisdom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot like a husband and wife both planning to go to a church retreat, and the wife goes first and she comes home and she's all excited. And the husband is like freaking out. What happened to you? Well, until he goes through a similar experience, he's not going to be able to relate to it.
Yeah.
And I liken this to a lot of people that they've really taken the bait that this is critical to running a professionally managed business. And I will repeat that phrase. If you ask people, where do you position yourself on the curve from just being a normal day-to-day typical farmer to a professionally managed business? First of all, they have to define what that is. But if you give them some language to define what that is, very few farm businesses would not aspire to be this. But most would be honest and say, but I'm not there. And we can't just talk generalities. We have to give people specifics about best practices that when you do these things, they're not a guarantee, but they certainly up your chances of success. They build teamwork, they build communication, they help creating a more defined and positive culture. And I think we all aspire for those things. If we're looking at a longer term sustainable business and we hope to pass that on to future generations, these are not nice things. These are absolutely essential things that we have to do.
Absolutely. And, you know, you look at the next generation that's coming up, myself and younger yet, those kids, say kids now, those youngsters are eager, right? And the knowledge they have at their fingertips, I think they'll gobble concepts up like this. I really do.
Well, they're actually much more supportive of this.
Yeah.
But if they don't pursue the right strategy to get buy-in from the other partners in the business or the senior members, it can backfire and walls come up. And then they just get frustrated and they leave. So there has to be an openness in the senior members of the business to innovate, to allow for change, to be able to allow someone else to make some small mistakes without jeopardizing the business. And if you have a very autocratic atmosphere where it's the boss, not management thinking, it's probably not going to attract successors to that business. So this isn't going to be a fit for everybody.
Okay, so that's good stuff. We spoke a fair bit about job templates. Can you just quickly hit a few high notes? I know in our show notes, we're going to include information about your guidebook, and we're going to put links to your website. We're going to put links, if somebody is interested, they can go and learn about it and buy. But can you touch on a few more of the things in there just so our audience gets a good understanding?
Well, probably the two biggest chapters are on organization and roles, and the other chapter is on setting farm policies. And people look at you like, what do you mean? This sounds bureaucratic. But we're talking about the landmines in the family business that if we don't address these things, they literally blow up. So how do we define compensation? How do we set an understanding of family employment policy? Who gets to come back to the business and under what conditions? If somebody's interested in joining the business, what's the framework that they have to pursue to even be considered?
Nice.
What's your family ownership policy? Who gets to be an investor in your business? The assumption for many is, well, we'll just go back and eventually they'll let me buy in. But that assumption gets totally blown out when people come back and they realize, nobody had any intention of me buying in. Or I want to buy in, but I am totally unrealistic about the expectations of what it means to be an investor. So we have sample policies that help you by reading the policy and then understanding in the text the why behind it. It creates that educating tool of why you need this. I've had numerous people argue with me that they just totally disagree with off-farm apprenticeships. I had a mother bring her kids out of college clear across the country to go to one of my workshops because she believed what I was preaching, and the kids felt like they could learn more from their dad by going back to the farm than going and working for somebody else. So I laid out my conceptual discussion of why internships or apprenticeships away from the farm have value. And within about 10 minutes, we completely turned their views around on this.
Wow.
A lot of what the guidebook does is take some of those concepts and it lays it out where the reader can read it, reflect on it, and go, I don't have to agree with it, but I could certainly take that concept into heart, and then I can adapt it to what I want to do. So maybe you agree that apprenticeship is good, but you don't want to make your kids go away for 5 years. You may say you must have a job off the farm for at least 2 years working for someone that's not related. That could achieve in your mind the need to establish independence and an understanding of who you are. So there are 19 sample policies in the guidebook that cover everything from salaries to how do you set working days and hours, how do you set up employee benefits. I mean, there's just all these things that the first thing somebody comes to work, they want answers to. And oftentimes the only answer they get is an oral answer that may change a month from now because it's not in writing. So we can't afford to have that degree of informalness in a business anymore.
Yeah.
And what you find is you not only create clarity, but by having it in writing, you have a foundation that you can have your professional advisors look at and say, are we breaking any HR laws? Are we breaking any tax laws by what we're doing with compensation? Are we breaking any safety laws? We have a sample safety policy in here, and it's huge. And it's scary how few farms have a written safety policy. I do process improvement training classes, and I can scare the bejeepers out of an audience on abuses that relate to lack of a safety policy.
Hmm.
When I say that, the first reaction is, oh, that sounds hard. But there are templates all over the web, plus the samples in the guidebook that you can pull up and gives you 75 to 80% of the content you need. Then it's a matter of fine-tuning and making it fit your business, making sure that the employees and managers and owners all have read it, they agree with it, and then periodically there's a review and a signature that says, I've updated my review of this and I agree with it and I agree to abide by it. In the absence of this, you have an accident and you're jeopardizing the net worth of your business.
Wow.
And people, they assume that's never going to happen to them. It's only going to happen to the neighbor. But we've had accidents on our farm by contractors who weren't our employees, but any one of those could have broke us if we had not had the right understandings and agreements and policies in place.
Wow. Who thinks of that? Honestly, I don't have a safety policy. Don't tell
I'll send you a sample.
Don't tell anybody other than all the people that are watching this, okay? But you know what? These are things that we get busy. And again, where do you find that? But you know what I like about that, Dick, is what I see here is an operating manual for your farm. It takes a lot of the guesswork, a lot of the brain work, a lot of the research work out. But to me, where I go with this is it takes a lot of the emotion out of the farm family business. If, I'm almost going to wonder if some generations aren't going to be receptive, and that's okay. If they're not, you can't change it. But shame on my generation and the next ones as we start to establish our farm, right? Because you know what I like about this? Anybody staying at home can go through this, take the time. And then when the kids are coming back to the farm, here is a black and white, non-emotional way to have hard conversations with your kid. Instead of just saying, Mom and Dad don't want you to. Our farm policy is. Our compensation policy is. And now it's not just Mom and Dad are only going to pay you. It's our policy set on industry standards says this is what this role is worth. And, right, it just, to me, in a business where there's so much emotion, family dealing with family, and we already know how many dynamics there are to that already. And now add in business issues and unfair situations, there's really no doubt why a lot of farm families implode. But if we can have our operating manual, to me, sorry, I'm on my soapbox, but if we can refer to this unemotional farm operating manual, wow, didn't we just change that conversation with our kids?
We did. And I, not to take exception to your words, but you never get rid of emotion.
No, you don't.
What this tool allows you to do is to manage the emotions.
Yes.
You actually want emotion. You want people to be emotionally committed to the things they believe in. So if part of your emotional concern is you want fairness and compensation, a well-written policy helps you manage those emotions where nobody will ever be fully happy, but they'll be equally unhappy. See what I mean? And so a lot of the stress in agriculture that's there due to prices and climate we can't control, but we can control the uncertainty that's caused by a lack of a planning process, the lack of a budget, the lack of a review process that reviews how we're performing from year to year. If we don't have good records and we don't share them with our stockholders, it's amazing how many family businesses have 3 or 4 owners working together where no one is allowed to see the books except the largest owner. And you just go, why would you be an owner and not demand to see these books? But it's part of the culture. So these are best practices where, for example, if you read through the section on management control, and part of good financial reporting is to have a process that monthly the records are put in a binder, they're circulated by the owners, they check it off to see they read it. You go, well, that's not very hard to do. Many times it's just no one's thought about doing that. They haven't thought that other people might want to see these on a monthly basis. And I'm a firm believer that even if they never look at them, if those move around from person to person every month, and then they check it off after it's ridden around their pickup for a week and it's full of grease, even though they didn't crack the book, the point is they could have. That there's total transparency in our business, that there's openness, and that every action that you take that results in a financial entry in the books will be reflected. So when people do what's inspected, not expected, and if you know that the ramifications of your actions are going to show up in a financial report, there's an incentive not to do something stupid. Doesn't mean that we don't do things occasionally that somebody's going to raise their eyebrows and say, why did they do that?
But it was a good deal at the auction, Tracy.
Right. Or I thought it was a good marketing decision at the time.
Or the other way around. It was a good deal, Anthony. I won't throw him under the bus. I love it. You know, business is not easy. Farm family business is not easy. And I just see this as I keep on calling it a farm operating manual. Just figure it out, plug and play is kind of how I look at it.
And, you know, for the older generations, they think in terms of manuals like this. For the young generations, they live in the cloud, where if you build your farm operating manual and governance system, and then you put it into Dropbox, or you put it into Google Docs, or you have it out there in the cloud, it's totally accessible to all the members of your team on a live basis. And part of the dynamics in working with clients is how to take away that, okay, I did it, check off the box, and nobody ever looks at it again. If that's what you do, then you will have wasted your time. So the whole point of this is to create a living document that guides how you run your business. And everyone has to feel like it's always accessible. It's always open to review and update as things change. So probably once a year, you need to review job descriptions and see what's changed. At least once a year, or maybe every other year, you will need to do a total review of your policies and see if they make sense. As we transition to the next generation, one of the debates that came up is, well, we don't necessarily agree with all the policies that you followed. And I said, fine. I said, you are the owners now. I'm in board chair, and my role as board chair is not to dictate to you what your policies are, but I am going to insist that you have a policy. Update it to reflect your generation, your needs, your value system. But you can't not have a policy on compensation. You just can't do that. You can't just ignore it. You have to have something. And when you've lived in an environment where you've had this structure, it's even worse to not keep it up and then drift away, because people remember what it was like when you had structure versus the uncertainty when you don't have it.
Yeah. That is good stuff. And, you know, it's funny, we think we don't need these things, but you do hear horror stories of children taking parents to labor board for whatever reason. After years of not being paid and finding out they're not getting the farm, they sue their parents. Well, parents, where was the employment contract? And now, unfortunately, we're in a world where farming gets more and more scrutinized every day. What are our environmental and safety policies? It probably won't be a very far off day until we're mandated, unless we already are.
I think farmers has a misnomer because they're small that they don't apply, and that is the total misnomer. If you have an accident on your farm, whether you're in Canada or US, you'll have somebody from occupational safety or whatever your organization's called on your farm the next day.
See, there you go. Even myself, I thought, we're exempt. We're farmers.
No, you're not. And if you can't show them your safety policy, how you communicated to the employees, what kind of meetings you held to share that periodically, the proof of attendance and signatures that said, I read this annually, you're at risk. You're at total risk. And the government can fine you, or the family who is left as the victims of an accident will come back and they have a very solid basis to sue you. It always amazes me that people will hesitate to spend money on a book or a facilitator where they might spend $5, $10, $20, $30,000 to help you get through some of this stuff. But they think it's fine to spend $200,000 in legal fees once they have a problem to break up the business or to deal with an accident. It's like, that's not a good trade.
Yeah, and you don't even think of those things, right?
Look at this as an investment, not as an expense.
Do you guys touch on farm partnership structures in there, or is that more left to the lawyers?
Well, in the section on strategic planning, we talk about there's a number of strategic issues that should always be on your radar screen. Should we grow or not? Should we diversify or not? Should we strategically ally with a neighbor and share equipment, or should we go on our own? And business structure is just one of many strategic issues. You know, what is the best legal structure to optimize your situation? It may be involving, it may be a partnership, it may be a single proprietorship, it may be a corporation. But that's the last thing you answer. If you build the rest of this process and you define your business, the people, their goals, you can sit down with a good attorney and they can go, based on your situation, this is the best legal structure for your business. I tell farmers, don't self-medicate. Study the options enough to ask intelligent questions, but surround yourself with really good advisors, a good tax advisor, a good legal advisor, a good wealth products advisor, a good insurance advisor. And if you have your documented governance and operating system in place and you share that with all those people, they're in a totally different position to serve you well than if you sit down with them individually and answer their individual questions and you're repeating yourself constantly because you don't have anything in writing to explain to all these people who you are, how your business operates. I have a little quiz that I ask people in succession planning workshops where what's the first thing that happens? Well, they look at you and I went and talked to my accountant and said, I'm thinking about transitioning the business. And I said, and what did he ask you? Well, he asked you how many kids you have, how old you are you have them on the farm. He asked you a million questions, right? Yeah. And it's clicking at $300 to $500 an hour. Says the bill is running up, and all you're doing is giving them basic information. Then you go to the attorney's office. And what's he ask? Questions. And the clock's running at $300 to $500 an hour. And if you had thought through all the questions that they would need to know about what your business is, its mission, your values, the org chart, the job descriptions, the financial position, the last 5-year trends, if you had already thought through that and had it in a book, what do you think that would save you compared to giving that information to these professionals piecemeal? And I can tell you the answer. It's between $6,000 and $10,000 just to compile, to have your professionals compile for you stuff that they need to know that's simply asking you questions and writing it down. Why would you not do that yourself? Educate yourself all you can about your business and then give that same resource to every one of these advisors.
I like it.
Now they all have the same story. They can also function better as a team because they've all got the same resource. So doing this, not just to run your day-to-day business more professionally, this is a huge essential step in positioning for transition. And most of the time, the number one motivating factor of people wanting to do this and buy the guidebook is they're looking at transition. They're looking at massive change in their business, change in ownership, change in roles and responsibilities. And as I tell you, you can't determine where you're going to go until you define where you are. And a lot of this is putting on paper where you are today, and then we can talk about how we'll transition to where we want to go in the future. So this is a combination of management and also succession plan.
Okay. Fantastic. I'm glad we had this chat for more than a few reasons. I'm taking notes, Tracy's to-do list. Okay, so that is lots of good stuff. I am glad you walked us through all of that. I love the tool. I'm going to be advertising it in the show notes if our audience wants to check it out and buy it for their farm. One last question. I know your background. I know your passion. I know your frustrations. What is your mission with the Guidebook?
My number one mission is to help people articulate what it means to build a professionally managed business. Excellent. I don't want it to just be a intangible concept. I want them to be able to articulate with real business language. It means doing this and this and this and this. It means, and it isn't just creating that document. I want them to see that there's a process that you can go through. How do you get your family to sit down and even agree on what policies are? The strategy of how you do it is just as important as getting the job done. How have other successful businesses actually sat down and gone from nothing in writing on job descriptions to having an organization chart and well-written job descriptions that everybody agrees with? My number one goal is implementation. I don't want people just to think about it. I want to change behavior where people can say, I know I need it. I'm going to get it done. And then once I get it done, I'm going to commit to updating it on a regular basis. So that's my mission. And the indirect benefit of that is that I'm hoping that people that follow that will be the survivors in agriculture in the future.
Excellent. That is an amazing mission. You share the same mission as I do with this, Joe, to create strong farming operations that can be passed on to the next generation. So thank you. Now, if individuals in our audience want to learn more about you and connect with you, I know you are based in the States. Do you still do consulting work? Do you work outside of the US? How can people connect with you, interact with you, touch base with you?
Well, they can get a lot of resources off the website. I've done consulting work and workshops across Canada for almost 40 years. And I've done work in Australia, New Zealand, and most of the work in the US. I don't specifically seek out client relationships outside of the States. My goal is to create an awareness in producer audiences of what they need to do, and then inspire them to solicit help from the resources right in their own backyards. I have a long relationship with Farm Management Canada. I've got a great working relationship with Farm Credit Canada. Both of those organizations are strongly committed to advancing management in agriculture. So we've had a great partnership over the years where I've keynoted a number of their conferences. So I'm sure a lot of people listening to your show have probably heard me once upon a time. Okay. But I'm not here to sell my services. I'm here to create an awareness on the audience's part that they need to act. And that there are resources out there. The only excuse for failure is not grabbing those resources and trying to implement them. And
Perfect.
There's tremendous talent in Canada to take people into this. And the problem is a lot of times those people know the clients need help, but they can't convince the clients to hire them. And that's where I've found my best role is to convince an audience, you need to take action, you need to do this stuff, and here are the resources in your own backyard that can help you do this.
Wow. And the perfect starting point with the Guidebook, right?
Yep.
Excellent. Unless you have any wisdom that can top what you already shared with us, Dick, I am going to wrap up the interview. It's been a blast.
I'm going to quit while I'm ahead.
What was that?
I'm going to quit while I'm ahead.
Oh, so you can't top that. Well, I'm sure you could top that wisdom, but you know what? This has been a great, fantastic episode. Thank you for sharing your time, your wisdom with the guidebook. Just so you know, I'm actually going to be buying one and offering it to our audience as part of a contest that we're doing. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And you guys in the audience, stay tuned. Make sure to sign up to become an Impact Farming Insider for your chance to win one of the guidebooks. Wouldn't that be great? So
yeah, that's a fun thing to do. I frequently do that as a door prize at conferences, and people always are very excited to be the winner of the guidebook.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, thank you. And I look forward to future conversations, Dick.
All right. Thanks, Tracy. And thank you for your passion and for supporting this resource.
My pleasure. And thank you guys for joining us on another episode of the Impact Farming Show. If you like the episode, like it, subscribe, and share it out so that other farmers can hear Dick's great wisdom. Thank you for joining us, guys. Bye.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.